and welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. So on today's episode, we're going to be keep this horror train moving. On last week's episode, I was talking about Scream from 1996, how it was so influential to the horror genre at the time, how it reinvigorated the genre as a whole, had a whole lot of imitators come out after it, and things of that nature. Well, today I'm going to be talking about a horror movie from 1973 called The Wicker Man. Now, this movie is a British horror film that was released back in these days, and it is one of my favorite horror films. I still think Carrie's my top favorite, but, you know, this is a movie where it's not your typical type horror film, and I think that's why I enjoy it so much. For most of the movie, it's really kind of a police procedural, like crime drama thing going on. It's a bit of a mystery as well, you know. It's also like kind of a musical a little bit too, so you might also get some musical interludes throughout this podcast that I'll put in. Yeah, it's just not your typical horror movie, but the last 10 or 15 minutes of this movie makes it a horror movie, and we'll get into that. But I really do think that this film is just such a great example of what horror as a genre can be. I think it has absolutely inspired other people in the horror genre. And so as always, we'll go over some figures of the film. We'll go over some critical response quotes I found off Rotten Tomatoes. We'll go over the cast of characters, you know, who are our players in this movie. Then we'll go over some background about the film, how it came to be, talk about some of the casting, some of the filming, things like that, and then we'll move into a plot summary. So let's get started with those figures. So The Wicker Man was directed by Robin Hardy, written by Anthony Shaffer, produced by Peter Snell, and music by Paul Giovanni. We're looking at a release date in the UK of December 6, 1973, and a US release date of May 15, 1974. We're looking at a budget of about £500,000, which in today's money would be about $2.9 million US. We're looking at a gross US and Canada box office of $60,891, and then a worldwide gross of $180,118 worldwide. We are looking at a Rotten Tomatoes score of 89% on the tomato meter and an 82% audience score. We're looking at an IMDb score of 7.5 out of 10 and a Letterboxd score of 3.9 out of 5. So I've pulled some log lines from some critical response quotes that I found on Rotten Tomatoes. So we have Luke Y. Thomas from New Times, who states on August 6, 2003, way overrated and cheesy as hell. Decent premise, though. We then have Ken Hankey from the Mountain Express in Asheville, North Carolina, who states on November 20th, 2003, he states, I have never and will never understand this film's reputation. And then we have Wesley Lovell from Cinema Site, who states on April 8th, 2019, he states, an exploitative mystery horror film in which Woodward overacts his heart out. Characters in this film, we have Edward Woodward as Sergeant Neil Howie. We have Christopher Lee playing Lord Sommerisle. We have Britt Eckland as Willow McGregor. We have Annie Ross as the actual voice of Willow McGregor because Britt Eckland is Swedish and she, I guess, did not speak very good English, so they had someone dub her voice. We also have Rachel Verney as Willow McGregor, the singing voice, because she sings throughout the movie. We have Diane Cilento as Miss Rose, the school teacher. We have Ingrid Pitt as the librarian and registrar. We have Lindsay Kemp as Alder McGregor, who is the landlord and the father to Willow. We have Irene Sunter as Mae Morrison, who owns the post office and the little candy shop, and who is Rowan Morrison's mother. We have Walter Carr as a schoolmaster, who we see early in the film. And we have Geraldine Cowper as Rowan Morrison, who is the young girl who's gone missing that Sergeant Howie has came to try to find. So, in the early 70s, Christopher Lee was a Hammer horror regular, in addition to Peter Cushing. Christopher Lee had played roles in a series of successful films. He was in The Curse of Frankenstein. He was also in a Dracula movie. And he wanted to break free of this image, and he wanted to take on more interesting acting roles. And so the idea for The Wicker Man actually started in 1971 when Christopher Lee met with the screenwriter Anthony Shaffer. They agreed to work together, and they wanted to bring about this story. So then Robin Hardy, and British Lionhead Peter Snell, who was the producer of this movie, they became involved in the project, and Shaffer had a series of conversations with Robin Hardy, and the two decided that it would be fun to make a horror film that was centering on old religion, quote unquote, in sharp contrast to like the Hammer films that they had both seen as horror film fans. So they wanted to do something that was a little different than Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing just cutting it up for Hammer horror. So Shaffer read the David Pinner novel Ritual, and this book is about a devout Christian police officer who is called to investigate what appears to be the ritualistic murder of a young girl in a rural village, and decided that it would serve well as the source material for this project that they were taking on. So Pinner originally wrote Ritual as a film treatment for a director named Michael Winner, who had John Hurt in mind as a potential star that he wanted to get. Winner eventually declined the project, so Pinner's agent actually persuaded him to write Ritual as a novel instead. So that's why we got a novel instead of a film treatment for Ritual. Shaffer and Christopher Lee paid Pinner about £15,000 for the rights to the novel, and then once they did that, Shaffer then set to work on the screenplay. He soon decided that a direct adaptation of the film would not work as well, and he then based a new story only loosely based on the story of the novel. So Shaffer really wanted the film to be a little bit more literate, quote unquote, than the average horror picture. He specifically wanted a film with minimal violence and gore. He was tired of seeing horror films that just relied on viscera to be scary. And the focus of the film was crystallized when he finally hit upon the abstract concept of sacrifice. So the image of the Wicker Man, which gives the film makers their title, was taken from the description of the practices of human sacrifice by the Gauls in Julius Caesar's Commentaries on the Gallic War. So, quote unquote, others have figures of vast size, the limbs of which formed of osiers they fill with living men, which being set on fire, the men perish enveloped in the flames. So for Shaffer, that was the most alarming and imposing image that he had ever thought of. So then that kind of gave him a good set to then make this about the Wicker Man. So the idea of the confrontation between a modern Christian and a remote pagan community intrigued Shaffer, and who then performed painstaking research on paganism, and he brainstormed with Hardy. They conceived the film as presenting the pagan elements objectively and accurately, which was then accompanied by authentic music throughout and a believable contemporary setting, which then was, where they shot at. And one of their main resources was using something called the Golden Bough, and that was a study of mythology and religion that was written by a Scottish anthropologist named James Fraser. So in talking about some casting, we have television actor Edward Woodward, who was cast as Sergeant Neil Howie, after the part was declined by both Michael York and David Hemmings. So in Britain, Woodward was best known for his role in a show called Callan, which he played from 1976 to 1972. And after The Wicker Man, Woodward went on to get roles in 1980s Breaker, Morent, and then also the 80s TV series The Equalizer. So that's what he went on to be known for. Of course, Christopher Lee was already known from the Hammer films, so he kind of got himself in that, and people knew him from that. After Shaffer saw Diane Cilento on the stage, he kind of lured her out of semi-retirement to play the schoolmistress. They actually lived together in Queensland from 1975, and they married in 1985, so that was kind of nice. Ingrid Pitt, who's another veteran of British horror films, she worked with Christopher Lee in some of the Hammer horror films, was cast as the town librarian and the registrar. The Swedish actress Britt Eckland was cast as the innkeeper's lascivious daughter, although two body doubles were used for her naked scenes because she is naked in the movie. Eckland actually found out she was 3 months pregnant while she was 2 weeks into filming, so they had to, try to get somebody to help with those nude scenes. So the film's choreographer, a gentleman by the name of Stuart Hops, called in a person by the name of Lorraine Peters, who was a nightclub dancer from Glasgow, who gyrated at the doorway and against the wall of the bedroom in these nude wall scenes, which we'll talk about more in the plot summary. And as I stated, her speaking and singing voices were respectively dubbed by Annie Ross, who had gone and done some horror movies and other movies as well. Apparently also dated Lenny Bruce back in the day. And Rachel Verney, respectively, who was the singing voice of all of Willow's songs. The filming of this movie. So this film was actually produced at a time of crisis in the British film industry. So the studio in charge of the production, which was British Lion Films, was in trouble financially and was bought by a wealthy businessman by the name of John Bentley. So to convince the unions that he was not about to asset strip the company, Bentley needed to get a film into production right away. This meant that The Wicker Man, which was actually set in spring, actually began filming in October of 1972. So because of this, artificial leaves and blossoms had to be glued onto the trees in many scenes. The production itself was kept on a very small budget for the time. Christopher Lee was keen to get this film made, and even he and other people worked on the production without pay. And so while this filming was taking place, British Lion was actually bought by EMI Films. This film was mostly shot around small Scottish towns. I won't even attempt to say them because I don't want to mess them up too bad. But then also some scenes were filmed in and around the Isle of Whithorn, which the owners of the castle, a person by the name of Elizabeth McAdam McLaughlin and David Wheatley, plus several other local people, featured in various scenes. So there's this big castle that they have, which is called Culzean Castle in Ayrshire, and its grounds, and then Floors Castle were also used in the shooting, because you do see some of these castle structures throughout Sommerisle. Some of the opening flying shots, because Sergeant Howie flies into the to Sommerisle from the mainland. Some of those feature the Isle of Skye, which includes the pinnacles from the store and the Kirong. Some of the cave scenes near the end where it's filmed inside Wookey Hole in Somerset. And actually, the amphibious aircraft that carries Sergeant Howie to Sommerisle was a Thurston Teal, and it was owned and operated in the aerial sequences by a gentleman by the name of Christopher Murphy. And the climax of this film, which is kind of unfortunately a spoiler of the film, was actually shot at the cliff tops at Burrowhead. And according to Britt Eckland, some of these animals perished in the Wicker Man, but actually Robin Hardy has said in an interview that it was great care was taken to ensure that none of the animals were in danger of being hurt during the scene, and that none of them were actually inside the Wicker Man when it was actually set on fire. Oops, spoiler alert, sorry, but that's what this says. So now that we've gone through some of the, background casting, filming of this movie, let's move into a plot summary. I also just wanted to give a little disclaimer about film versions of The Wicker Man. So the film version that I watched and I will be covering today is actually the final cut of The Wicker Man, which was approved by Robin Hardy and was released back in 2013, I believe, on Blu-ray and everything. But just note that if you are streaming The Wicker Man on Amazon or anywhere where it's maybe streaming at, more than likely you're going to be watching the theatrical cut, which is going to differ a little bit than how I'm going to be explaining it in the plot summary right now. So just be aware of that. If you did want to get the final cut of The Wicker Man, totally do it. It's on Blu-ray. You could probably find it somewhere. But just know that what I'm going to be talking about in the plot summary is going to differ from if you watch it on Amazon or something like that. All right, let's move into that plot summary. Start our film with seeing this weird little sun god guy, this little face, and we just see him zoom in. And then we see a title card that says Sunday, the 29th of April, 1973, which is just setting us into where we're starting the film at. We see that Howie is in church. Howie's played by Edward Woodward, and we see that he is next to a lady who we are assuming that is his girlfriend, fiance. I believe it's actually his fiance, and they are at church singing hymns. So they're at church singing along with the hymn of the Sunday congregation, and then you see Howie delivering a speech to the congregation about taking in the body of Christ, the blood of Christ, and all of that. I will also say right now I am not the most religious of people, so I'm not as familiar with Christianity or Catholicism or any of this kind of stuff, so my understanding is only going to be very limited. But pretty much Howie is delivering a speech at the congregation, so this is supposed to set up that he is a devout man of faith. And then we see that Howie is in his little seaplane, and we see that he is flying the plane, and we have the title song coming in, and then we also go into another song called Corn Rigs while he is flying over to this British isle called Sommerisle. And I'll insert some clips of some of these songs because I think they're total bangers.
To the low country, oh,
corn rigs and barley rigs and corn rigs are funny. I'll not forget that happy night among the rigs with Annie.
Then we see Howie lands the plane, and he megaphones to these men on shore to have him get a dinghy sent out to him so he can come on shore. And the men say, there's a man that just says, hey, you can't land your plane without written permission. And he's all like, hey, I'm like a police officer, send me a dinghy, I'm looking for somebody. So then, they get a boat out to him, and the Howie meets the men on shore. So it's just these random assortment of men who are here. And he shows them a photo of a girl named Rowan Morrison. And Rowan Morrison is apparently missing. He's received a letter from somebody. It was an anonymous letter stating that Rowan Morrison has been gone. He kind of passes his photo around. He reads from the letter and everything. So apparently none of these men on the shore seem to know who Rowan is. They don't know anything about her. And I think they end up saying hey, somebody named Mae Morrison is apparently her mother. So, do you know Mae? Oh yeah, Mae, she keeps the post office up this place. So maybe you go up there. So you see Howie, once he's done with these men, they're walking through the town, and residents are just looking at him. They're just like, who the hell? This police officer's here. They haven't really seen anybody looking like this. It doesn't seem like they have a police force. So they're just kind of wondering about who this person is. And then you just hear some music behind. Howie then ends up at Mae Morrison's, because there's literally a big sign that says Mae Morrison's. It seems apparently this is the post office, and then also it's like a candy shop too, like a sweets shop, if you will. And he meets Mae Morrison. Mae Morrison is played by Irene Sunter. And so pretty much he introduces himself to her and is like, hey, I'm looking for this person, Rowan. This is apparently your daughter. But Mae is saying that, oh no, her daughter's not missing. Her daughter is apparently Myrtle. And Myrtle is just in the back painting some pictures, and so Mae then introduces Howie to Myrtle and, is saying oh, I got to take care of some business. Why don't you just sit with Myrtle? And so then, Howie is sitting with Myrtle, and Myrtle's painting this picture of a hare, and, Sergeant Howie is, kind of pacifying her in a way and just being talking to her and, just saying do you happen to know who Rowan is? And she's like, of course I know, silly, and then she talks about how Rowan is pretty much a hare, is like a rabbit, and is not really signifying that she is anything more than just that. We see that Howie ends up at a place called the Green Man Inn, and so he goes into the inn where all these people are drinking. It's like a pub pretty much as well. And he asks for a room from the landlord, who is Mr. McGregor. And then a song is starting to be sung called The Landlord's Daughter, which I will insert some of that right now.
And when our name is mentioned, the pants of every gentleman do stand up at attention. Oh, nothing can delight so as does the part that lies between her left toe and her right toe.
And so pretty much this song about Landlord's Daughter is talking about how Willow, who we meet, played by Britt Eckland, is like a good lay in bed pretty much, I guess, or that she's really hot and that, you know, yeah, who could resist the landlord's daughter kind of a thing. So then Howie is offered a drink, but he does decline it for right now. He does have beer with dinner though, so he's not completely averse to alcohol necessarily, but we'll find out more about what he might be averse to. And so he announces to the whole bar that he is looking for Rowan Morrison and shows the picture to the bar, but really nobody has seen her at all. So then Howie notices that the Harvest Festival photos that are in the bar, it's pretty much like a girl standing on like a barrel or like a wagon or something, and it's like normally a bunch of fruit around her. And he notices the last years is not there, and somebody just comments that like, oh yeah, it got broke. So, it's not up there right now. Howie does get some dinner. He gets like some potatoes and beans and things, but he attempts to eat it, but he hates the food. It's disgusting and gross. And this is where he's talking to Willow a little bit and, talking about how like, oh, for after dinner, I'll take an apple. And, she's all like, we don't have apples right now. And be like, oh, well, I guess, you could get peaches and cream if you want. Oh, I bet it's from a can. And so Howie's kind of talking about how all this stuff's from a can. There's nothing fresh here. There's nothing whatever. So that kind of goes back into like, the harvest and all of that kind of stuff for this island, which will then kind of play back in the rest of the movie. You hear Willow say something about, cheer up, food isn't everything in life, Then Howie goes outside into a field and he's seeing people having sex out in the open. This is all shot in, kind of like slow-mo. So he's seeing that, and that is like totally not up his alley because he is not about all that. And he then sees people at night watering graves for some reason. Don't really know why. And then he also sees a naked lady who's just like sobbing on a grave in particular. He then goes back into the inn with all the people and he goes up to his room that he's got because he's trying to get away from all the naked people. And all this like debauchery he's seeing. And then so this is actually a song that was cut from the film, and it's called Gently Johnny, and I'll insert a clip of that in here.
I put my hand on her thigh and she says, do you want to try? I put my hand on her belly and she says, do you want to fill me gently, 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 Johnny, gently, Johnny, my jingle.
This Gently Johnny song, you see that Christopher Lee is coming over, Lord Sommerisle, we find out. He is coming with this young man who's like 13 or 14 years old. He's coming and bringing this boy, this young man over to the inn to pretty much have some time with Willow. So this scene is to kind of show, and this whole song is to kind of show that I guess Willow is the village's I don't know, what you would call it, sex worker, if you will. She seems to be the one that takes all of the young men and deflowers them, if you will. Which is kind of interesting because then I kind of wonder, I'm like, okay, but like what happens with like the women then? Do things happen to them too? Or is it just the young men? Like, I always kind of wonder that a little bit. But, but that's what we see with Gently Johnny. And then Christopher Lee is talking about like living like an animal. You see some like weird snail sex like going on, I think. And then Howie is praying before bed, so you see him on his knees, with his hands clasped, and he's like praying before bed. And then in the background, you're hearing Willow pretty much just moaning from sex. So you're to assume that she is having sex with this young man, and that's like part of her job. That's why they were singing earlier about the landlord's daughter and all that stuff. So, and now it's the next day. And we see that Sergeant Howie has now ventured outside. We see Willow out there is wiping a table for some reason. See that Howie's asking where the school is. So he's walking over to the school. And then we see this scene of the Maypole song and dance going on. So we see the schoolmaster played by Walter Carr. And we see all these young men around the Maypole, and they're all singing and kind of dancing around it. And I'll insert a clip of that in here so you can hear that.
And on that bed there was a girl, and on that girl there was a man, and from that man there was a seed, and from that seed there was a boy, and from that boy there was a man, and from that man there was a grave, and from that grave there grew a tree.
So we have that fun little Maypole song teaching, people about the birds and the bees and all that, apparently. And Howie comes in and he's interrupting this class. The schoolmaster for this class is Miss Rose, played by Diane Cilento. And so he comes in and interrupts the class. He is stating that he is to report this degradatious behavior he's been seeing to the proper authorities. Even though he has no jurisdiction to this island, it's private property, and like this is a private school, he thinks that this is all horrible, that they're teaching about the phallic symbol and like all this stuff. And so Howie then goes over to the board where he writes Rowan's name on it, and he passes the photo around to the schoolgirls all here. There's all but one desk filled in this room. So you're like, what the hell's going on? And so then you see that Howie just kind of goes into one of the desks and he sees this little beetle that's like on a string, and it's like pretty much like walking around this nail or whatever, and then it like goes and walks not around the nail, and it's just kind of like in this weird cycle or whatever. And I guess one of the girls is like setting this up so that it just kind of does it. And Howie's just like, well, why do it then? Like, what the hell? Howie demands for the school registrar and asks to see it, and then he finds Rowan Morrison's name in here. So up to this point, everyone doesn't seem to know who Rowan is, but her name is in the motherfucking school register. So it's like, well, what are we doing here? And so he calls the girls liars. He threatens Miss Rose, you're the biggest liar of all. And so then, Miss Rose is like, hey girls, like do your readings. I'll be back in just a minute. And so Miss Rose then explains to Howie how they teach children about death, how they don't use the word death, and talking about, how children are more, willing to take on reincarnation than resurrection. These rotting bodies aren't exactly the most favorable, for that kind of thing. And so he's like, okay, I guess, but like, do these kids not know about Jesus? And all that kind of stuff. So, she's able to talk to him about that and, kind of get him on his way to kind of stop poking his nose around. And then Howie goes into a little graveyard, and he finds like this weird headstone going on, and he then sees a woman with an egg in her hand breastfeeding her baby for some reason. He then also finds some apple crates, and he throws them on the ground, and from the wood of the apple crates, I think he then makes like a little makeshift cross, because he's wondering now, he's like, where the hell is the church? Like, where is this thing? And because he's a devout man, like, but these folks are not exactly Christians, they're pagans, so they don't have these churches like that. They don't worship God, in the same way as a Christian would. Then Howie meets the gravekeeper, whatever you want to call him, and he sees Rowan Morrison's grave, which, because there was a rowan tree there, it was planted. So of course that's the grave of Rowan Morrison. And apparently there's like on the rowan tree, there's like a navel string from them, just like on the tree, which is kind of weird. And we see that Mae Morrison has put a frog in the mouth of a little girl that she's treating to kind of help cure a sore throat that the little girl has. And Mae Morrison gives like a little sweet to the girl, for that. And Howie pretty much says like everyone in the island is mad and Mae is crazy and like all these people. So then Howie then goes to the public records, the registrar, played by Ingrid Pitt, and he gets the index of death from the librarian, or this registrar lady, I guess, to kind of see about this, but he sees no death record for Rowan Morrison, so there's no death certificate, I guess. So there's nobody confirming that Rowan Morrison actually died, technically. So he's like, this shit's not adding up. So then they show the registrar the photo of Rowan. She claims that that is Rowan, but that she doesn't know anything about her. Which, again, this whole movie is just kind of like off kilter. Like, nobody seems to know anything about Rowan when asked about her, So it's just kind of leaving Howie to be like, what the hell is going on here? I'm so confused. So then Howie takes a horse and buggy and he goes through some trees. He's going through the picturesque fields of Sommerisle, and he sees some naked ladies jumping over a fire, and they're singing a little song. I'll insert some of that song into here.
Take the flame inside you, burn and burn below. Fire seed and fire feed and make the baby grow. Take the flame inside you, burn and burn below. Fire seed and fire feed and make the baby stay. Take the flame inside you, burn and burn below. Fire seed and fire feed and make the baby strong.
So then after he sees those naked ladies jumping over the fire, he comes to Lord Sommerisle's house. And pretty much what happens is he goes into Lord Sommerisle's house. He meets him, played by Christopher Lee. Lord Sommerisle is talking about, that they're a deeply religious people. They're taking note of the women, jumping outside over the fire. I think Lord Sommerisle says something about like, well, it'd be much too dangerous for them to jump over the fire with their clothes on. And so Howie just doesn't seem to understand this religion. He judges their beliefs, hella judges their beliefs. And he's just like, why don't these people know about Jesus or God or any of this kind of stuff? Again, this is where we kind of get the idea that Howie is not exactly the most open of people when it comes to belief, and he's just like, no, this is the one true God, so like whatever anybody else thinks, especially you all pagan people, like, no, this is not the right way to believe. So then Lord Sommerisle is explaining the history of Sommerisle and how his grandfather changed up the island, how apparently, his grandfather could grow fruit on the island, and that kind of started up like how, like there was fruitful harvests and all. Lord Sommerisle was just raised to do what his father did because his grandfather did the same thing. So he's just kind of keeping Sommerisle going and keeping it up, and, there was some real good harvest that would come from this, land and soil and everything. And pretty much the reason Howie has come to Lord Sommerisle, he's to try to get permission to exhume the body of Rowan Morrison. So he, gets it pretty quickly. He's just like, yep, you can go and exhume her body. That's totally fine. So then Howie's like, all right, I gotta get out of here. So he then goes back to the graveyard with the gravekeeper, exhumes the body of Rowan Morrison, and he, sees that it's just the body of a dead hare. So you're like, what in the hell? So he then brings the dead rabbit to Lord Sommerisle's house in the middle of the night while he and Miss Rose are just singing, which I thought was really nice. And so they're just kind of singing, and he's playing the piano, and Miss Rose is just singing with her wine or whatever. How he explains what he's been trying to do to find about Rowan. He's just like, I found this in Rowan Morrison's grave. He believes that Rowan has been murdered by pagans. He said he's going to report all of this to the mainland police. Christopher Lee, I think Lord Sommerisle says something about May Day being tomorrow. So, if you want to leave now, you might want to do that because May Day is going to be tomorrow and you're really not going to want to stick around. So then you see after, Christopher Lee and good old Miss Rose, they're continuing to kind of sing and, mind their own business. You then see Howie break into he breaks into the photo shop at night. He was just there because he went to the photographer to go ask about the photo, at the Harvest Festival, it was broken, but do you keep copies of it? And he's like, no, I don't. So he breaks into this photo shop and he finds some different photos. So he's just like, okay, what the heck are these? But he develops the Harvest Festival photo from the previous year, and he finds out that Rowan was actually the May Queen. So he was he's seeing this, and he sees that apparently the crops failed at this particular Harvest Festival, and that it kind of then clicks something in his brain to make him think that somehow she's in danger. And so that kind of sets about the next bit of the story. So then you see Howie, he is back. It's like a flashback to the church. He's doing a cracker and wine routine at the Christian church. I think we kind of saw a little bit of this earlier as well. And he's giving the speech to his congregation. We then see, honestly, the most iconic song in the world. It's called Willow Song. And Willow is pretty much naked as hell. And she's dancing around her room. Okay. And I'm going to insert a clip of that now.
A stroke as gentle as a feather.
Wasn't that so great? So Howie's in bed as he's listening to this song, and Willow's pretty much singing to him to try to seduce him to come fuck her, pretty much. And that's literally what it is, but it's such a banger and it's so good. And so then when he actually goes to sleep, Willow then comes in the next morning and gives breakfast to Howie. And Howie talks about how he's engaged to be married and that he does not believe in premarital sex. So, this whole scene is really kind of showing that, because even Willow says, I invited you, I thought you'd come around. And he's just saying, well, I'm engaged to be married. Be like, well, does that stop you? And then he's pretty much saying, I don't believe in premarital sex. I don't believe in it before marriage. So you see some creepy ass kids. They're walking in a line. They're singing "We Carry Death Out of the Village," and the line leader girl is holding up this weird looking baby doll. It's plastic. It's not plastic. It's glass or something, or porcelain. It's really weird. Anyway, so then Howie does his research about May Day festivals. And so what he finds out when he's going to the library to go research is that when a harvest goes bad, a human sacrifice is offered by burning up the sacrifice, pretty much. So this is what he's looking into and finding out about. And then you see, and he's finding out more about, like, you know, there's like, you have this like man horse, like costume that this person wears for the May Day. You then have the man woman, which is like the leader of it, you know, with the procession, like leading the procession down. And then you have Punch, who is like a character, is a commedia dell'arte character, actually. And that's like the town fool or whatever. The villagers then, in animal masks, like look at Howie going over to his plane because he's supposed to be leaving to go to like back to the mainland, and he tries to get back to his little plane, but his plane doesn't work. And then, like I said, there were these like weird villagers with like these animal masks looking at him, but he doesn't see them. So then he's like, well, what the hell? My plane doesn't work now, and what am I supposed to do? So then he gets back on the island, and he's following this costumed horse dragon man through the town. So it's like this guy who's like wearing this like kind of like it's like this weird costume. He's like, you know, following him through town. And then he leads him over to this place where the villagers are convening with Lord Sommerisle before May Day, because pretty much it's like almost the day of May Day, I think, actually. And they're all preparing for this celebration later today. And so Lord Sommerisle states that a sacrifice will be given to the gods on May Day, because he says, like, you know, how the crops failed before. And so because of this, a sacrifice has to be given. So this kind of puts some ideas into Howie's head. So then Howie goes and tells Mae Morrison that Rowan is not dead. So, like, you know, what's going on here? So, you know, he's thinking, like, okay, Rowan is not dead. Like, she's going to get sacrificed. Like, this is now the idea that he has in his head. So he's now going through a bunch of these houses looking for Rowan. I think he comes across these kids in a window. He says, take those masks off. And he's just like so over this pagan stuff, but like he's just like so trying to like find out what's going on. So he like happens across a naked lady in the tub who was actually the registrar lady, the Ingrid Pitt. That was her. He also happens across a child in one of the houses who falls out of a wardrobe, and then she's just like kidding around or whatever, and she just like goes and like, you know, prances off. Then you see him go out to a ship on the water to explore. There's some like apple crates out there, which was kind of interesting. Then he goes to the baker and trying to find out about that. He's going to the meat butcher monger guy. He's going to a funeral like little home where there's like caskets and shit. And he ends up finding a body. I don't know if it's of a priest or who knows. I don't know who exactly it is, but he has no hand. His hand was cut off, and then he has coins over his eyes. So that was kind of weird. Howie then goes back to the Green Man Inn. He gets some whiskey. He asks for some whiskey from the landlord, since he's also the bartender, I guess. So then he's going up to his room. He doesn't really want to be disturbed, especially since it's May Day. He's not trying to kind of get all up into their bullshit that he thinks it is. Willow and her dad are talking while the door's open to Howie's room. They're talking about this hand of glory, and Howie's kind of overhearing this conversation. You know, you have this scene. Mr. McGregor is changing into his Punch outfit, pretty much, because then what happens is Howie overhears this conversation, and then he wakes up and he sees this like hand with like the tips of the fingers on fire, like candles, and he just like knocks it over. He's like, what the hell is this? So then he, like I said, Mr. McGregor is changing into his Punch outfit. Howie then hits him. He ties him up to his bed, like on like the, like not on the bed, but like you know, just like to the frame of the bed or something. And he steals the Punch outfit that Mr. McGregor was going to wear. And the procession starts marching down to this Stonehenge formation, kind of, sort of. So you have Christopher Lee there. He's in like this wig. His wig is laid, of course, this long black hair wig. And he's wearing this like yellow shirt and So it's him. Then you got that like weird like horse, half man, half horse thing. And then you got Punch, who Howie's in the Punch costume, but nobody knows because he has a little mask on. So he's just like kind of going around. And he's kind of like, nipping at the girls here and there, as they're supposed to. And then they get to this little Stonehenge formation. And then there's this like beheading tradition. So there's like these swords that like all like they get into like, they're put into a certain shape. And then everybody has to go through and like do the beheading tradition where pretty much like, and they all start saying chop, 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 and it's like somebody's head's gonna apparently get chopped off, but then nobody actually gets their head chopped off, so even it goes to the one person and it looks like they behead this person, but they actually don't. It's just this girl named Holly, and nobody actually ever got beheaded, but the normal tradition was that this could happen, and as part of that, that's what normally would have happened. And then from there, the villagers, including Lord Sommerisle and all that, they just frolic down to this beach. So Lord Sommerisle and all these villagers are walking along this rocky beach. Lord Sommerisle chops into this barrel of ale, and it like gives it to the sea as part of this. Rowan is finally presented as this quote-unquote sacrifice, and Howie then goes up and attempts to save Rowan. So like Rowan calls him Mr. Police, I think, and like they're running through these caves, right? So then you have Rowan and Howie, they're running through the caves, they're running through the caves. These villagers with torches are like following them through the caves to try to find Rowan and Howie, right? And so they finally come up, they've gone enough down this kind of like cave or whatever, but they come up on this one part that like is it's like a bluff overlooking the water or whatever. But then when we get to that, we see that Lord Sommerisle, Miss Rose, Willow, and Mae Morrison are all there, right? And Rowan is like, "Did I do it right?" And Mae's just like, "Oh, you did it perfectly, sweetie." And so then this is where I believe, at least, this film now turns into a horror movie, because their whole plan is now exposed. I think Lord Sommerisle even says the game is over. So the crops did actually fail. So that was a real thing that happened. Rowan Morrison, it was not the sacrifice at all. In fact, like, animals are all right to sacrifice, even a kid maybe, depending on the circumstance. But the right kind of adult is actually the best type of sacrifice. So this would be somebody who comes of their own free will. They have the power of a king. They're a virgin. They came as a fool. These are all things that they're talking about. This is when it's revealed Howie has been the sacrifice target this whole time. That's what freaks me out about this film, because everybody who he ever interacted with in this film knew what was going to happen to him from the moment he got to the island. Everyone knew it was going to happen to him, but nobody was going to tell him, because they all believe the same way. They all believe the same thing, and they all believe that having this kind of sacrifice will, in fact, help their crops not fail again. So that's what really skeeves me out and scares me about this film. So then Howie has his words with the villagers and is trying to say, like, listen, like, burning me up is not going to help your crops, He's then prepped for his sacrifice. He's put into this white shirt. I definitely could kind of clock some biblical undertext, some subtext there. I think Howie is talking about, like, I believe in the life eternal as promised by our Lord Jesus Christ. So, he's even in this kind of Jesus-y looking garb. Christopher Lee then says, it's time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man. So yeah, Howie's trying to tell these people, that these pagan gods aren't real. And these crops failed because the strains failed. Because of the environment. Like, this place is not supposed to be somewhere where you get fruits and all this stuff. Like, it's not supposed to, so that's probably why it failed. So, like, sacrificing him will not bring back the crops. So then, of course, Lord Sommerisle, and I think even, like, how he says, like, if you kill me, you're going to have to kill Lord Sommerisle, if this doesn't end up working. And Sommerisle, he doubles down and he says that the crops will succeed with the sacrifice. You won't have to have that happen again. And this is when Howie then says, think what you're doing. Think in the name of God. Think what you're doing. Think. And it's just like really freaky, because I think a big part of this film is, showing that like Howie, when he comes, is just so kind of condescending and a bit of an elitist of his religion. He kind of believes that he has the right belief, and these pagans are just something else. That they're not believing the right way. And what I think is really crazy or creepy about this movie is that there's nothing scarier than human belief itself. And the fact that there are cults out there in this world, the fact that, we've seen it in plenty of different examples, Jonestown and like the, Manson family and like all these different places, even when it didn't have to do with that and murder and all, but even with, other kind of cults as well, seeing that, it's just so freaky to think that like, what's scary is human belief and the fact that this is, a real thing. Howie's being led to the Wicker Man, and when he finally sees the Wicker Man, all he says is just, "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ, oh my God." And so he's freaking out about being sacrificed. And so then Howie is just put into this Wicker Man, bunches of animals that are about to be sacrificed. So you got like a lamb and pig and stuff like that. And then Lord Sommerisle, when he gets, Howie into the Wicker Man, he announces to the gods about, that they're giving the sacrifice to these particular gods or whatever. And Howie is yelling at the villagers from the Wicker Man. He's just yelling about, all of this stuff. And then the villagers burn the Wicker Man up. And then they start singing this song while the Wicker Man is burning up, which I'll insert here. Once they're singing that song, you see that Howie is singing out a psalm while being burned up in the Wicker Man. And he honestly is pretty much accepting his fate at that point. He's just accepting the fact that he's going to die. And he's praying to God. He then yells out to Daniel, which I think is a biblical reference. He's just accepting his fate. And then the Wicker Man, while the villagers are singing, burns down and falls. And then you have this beautiful sunset and then the ending credits. So I'll also make sure to insert what Howie is singing pretty much. And then that's the end of The Wicker Man. So, with this movie, when I watched it for the first time, I don't even remember when I watched it for the first time. Probably, I can't even remember. But, like, when I saw this for the first time, it unnerved me. It's just so freaky. I think the fact that this movie has a very stark ending, which in the 70s was pretty much like, it was kind of common in a way, that there would have these, there was no like happy ending to some of these movies, but just the fact that this guy comes to this island, he gets an anonymous letter to come. Now that we know the end of the film, the fact that everybody he's interacted with knew exactly what was going to happen to him, but nobody was going to tell him about it. Because they all believe the same thing. And they all believe that this is good for their crops and the harvest. And he doesn't realize until the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie. It's just really creepy to me. And really freaky. And then just the fact that, he is a man of faith, too. He is a devout Christian. And so because he's a devout Christian, he himself believes that he's going to, gain eternal salvation and he'll, go to heaven and all that stuff. And as somebody myself who isn't much of a religious person at all, I'm really more of an atheist, I guess. The fact that really, to me at least, he's praying to nobody, and he's screwed from that point, and so that freaks me out that much more. And then the fact that he just gets burned up. That's what's so scary. There was actually an alternate ending where I believe Howie does save himself and he's able to get out, but Robin Hardy didn't want to do that ending because it's unrealistic. It was unrealistic, and so he didn't want that. And I'm glad they didn't go with that other ending, because I think this ending makes a lot more sense, and I think it's just that much scarier. Because as I stated just a little bit ago, honestly, there's something really scary about just human belief as a whole, and religious extremism and, I don't know if it's a word, but zealotism, and the fact that, people will sometimes kill to appease their gods and religion and all of this kind of stuff. It's just so crazy to me and creepy, kind of. And that unsettles me more than Freddy Krueger or Jason or whatever. You know what I mean? Even though obviously, this story is a fictionalized story, of course, it doesn't make it any less freaky. I also believe that, a movie like Midsommar is a love letter to this kind of film because of the cult within it. Even a movie like Apostle that came out, it was on Netflix, that also has a kind of similar story a little bit. But I do think that this is a penultimate, it's a very shining example of a cult horror film that literally talks about a cult, and it's a staple in folk horror for a reason, because it's diving into the pagan beliefs, and I think that's just really interesting to be able to look at and see. So yeah, it's enough about me talking about the Wicker Man, I guess. Needless to say, I believe this is a really great horror film. It's not your typical horror film, but I love the music in it. I think it's really great. I think the story is really unsettling and freaky if you watch it, and I highly recommend it. As I stated earlier, I watched the final cut, which is on Blu-ray, so you can obtain that off Amazon or wherever you like to get your Blu-rays and DVDs and things like that. You can probably find it somewhere. If you do stream it anywhere, more than likely you're going to be streaming the theatrical cut, which is a little bit different than what I just explained. But generally, same kind of story. There's just some scenes that are missing, that aren't in the theatrical cut. But, I think Gently Johnny is cut out. I think the Christopher Lee bringing the young boy is cut out. Stuff like that. The beginning is cut out because the beginning of the theatrical cut actually starts off with Howie just flying to the island. It doesn't start out with the congregation and all that. You see that later in the film, in the theatrical cut. But anyway, yeah, I would stream this maybe if you want to as well. It was on Shudder a couple times I've seen. I think it might have even been on Prime Video before, but right now I think you can only really stream it if you were to rent it or something, or you go get the final cut on Blu-ray. I definitely recommend this movie in particular. I think you have to watch it at least once if you're a horror fan to just kind of see what you're getting into. I missed if I did not talk about the absolutely comedic remake of this movie in 2006 starring, Nicolas Cage. I will just say I'm not going to talk about it, and that's all I'll say about that. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so by emailing cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. If you want to give any movie recommendations, give feedback on the show, or if you just want to say, hey girl, hey, I'm open to all of it. You can also follow Cult Cinema Circle on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. Instagram handle is Cult Cinema Circle. Twitter handle is Cult Cinecircle. On those platforms, I tend to post when new episodes release. I'll post what the next episode is going to be. I make Instagram Instagram stories with little fun facts and all that, and just general fun stuff over there. And on Letterboxd, you can find me at Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, all one word. On there, I tend to log the movies that I've been watching. I write little reviews about them, and just general foolishness over there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast on your podcatcher of choice. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, or wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcasts. I make it pretty easy for you to find the show. Be sure to leave 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review. It helps get people to see the show more, and it helps more people find the show in general. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember, it's much too dangerous to jump through the fire with your clothes on. Take care. Bye.